Alpha, where we still bring you cutting edge conversation while exploring the quantum possibilities. New time, same place, right here on Broadcast Team Alpha website, Broadcast Team Alpha YouTube, and of course you can get us over on the Conscious Awakening Network. We're streaming out to like 44 platforms now. Go over to the Conscious Awakening Network. They have all kinds of beautiful hosts and interesting content, and they're actually holding classes and lots of new offerings. So please go over and see them. And we have to thank you for hitting subscribe, because we have finally crossed over the 10,000 subscriber mark. Thank you so much. Please, if you haven't subscribed, please continue to, because it really impacts the algorithms, and it also helps us to get incredibly high-level guests like our guest tonight that Aage's going to tell you about. Aage, please introduce Michael.
Oh, yes. We have Michael Schratt returning to Broadcast Team Alpha. And he is one of the researchers that finds the pictures to prove what he's talking about. It's not just words here. And he's a digger. And that's why he finds stuff that a lot of other researchers don't find. I want to say just a few things about him, and that is that he has a book out. It's called Dark Files. And I'll tell you, folks, he's got 61 pages of fully illustrated UFO encounters from around the world, and the pictures are there to prove it. I love books with pictures in it. They're so much different than just the words. And he also has stories to go with it. So and of course, you know where to find it. It's all on Amazon. He is also a speaker and a lecturer and a guest on shows just about everywhere. And he spends a lot of his time doing more research. And he has developed contacts in the deep, dark corners of the secret black projects and areas relating to that. And of course, also being a pilot, I have to mention, Michael is a pilot also. And there's a special community there that among pilots that is hard to understand if you're not one. And he spoke at the largest experimental air show in the world at OSHKOSH, Wisconsin, here, I think a few years ago. And I've been to that air show many times, and I tell you, that is a phenomenal place. You see the future, you see the present, and the deep past of aviation is all represented there. So let's get to some of the really interesting stuff, Michael. Welcome to the show.
Welcome,
good to
Michael.
be with both of you. Good to be with both of you.
Thank you. It's so good to have you here.
So,
yeah.
do you want to jump into the cases here? We can do that. Any direction you want to go is fine with me.
Yeah, we can jump into some cases, and maybe, as Aage mentioned, I think for people who are just coming into awakening, coming into ufology, maybe just kind of give some background information on what retrievals of the third kind actually defines.
Okay, so essentially retrievals of the third kind is an homage to the classification code set up by J. Allen Hynek. So it's Leonard Stringfield's way of honoring J. Allen Hynek's work, because it was Mr. Hynek that came up with the classification code. So a close encounter of the first kind is a visual sighting. That's a light in the sky. And we're really not concerned with those anymore, because we've been in this game for 80 years now. We have an overabundance of evidence. We don't need any more CE1 cases. So we've kind of cleaned those off the slate. CE2 is when a UFO sighting has physical effects. That includes static on your radio, car engine stalling, electrical systems burning out, broken branches, trace cases, crop circles, things like that. Physical effects. A close encounter of the third kind is when you have beings involved. So they could be extraterrestrial, they could be quote unquote alien, they could be interdimensional, something where a being is seen. So when Leonard said retrievals of the third kind in his status reports, it was an homage to all of J. Allen Hynek's work.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That's great.
Yep.
That's
Mhm.
great.
Mhm.
Are the cases of retrievals increasing?
I believe they're ongoing. Now,
They're
there's two
ongoing.
books out there. UFO Crash Retrievals by Leonard Stringfield. That's all of his 7 status reports put together in one large volume. And it's not for the faint of heart. It requires some diligent reading. There's really no drawings or illustrations to go with it. You have to really be interested in this subject matter to devour that type of a book. So there's at least 119 crash retrieval cases in that book. Now, Ryan Wood has recently come out with a updated version of his Magic Eyes Only, where he has 104 additional crash retrieval cases. So when you add this all together, now there are some overlapping there. There's definitely some overlap. So I'd say conservatively, we would have 250. If you want to knock that down another 25, because certainly there are some hoaxers in there. Certainly there are some cases that just didn't pan out. So conservatively, I would say 225 crash retrieval cases total.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Yep. Yep.
The
Interesting.
And
bunch.
all we need is one to be authentic. And the
Right.
whole case for non-existent crash retrievals completely falls apart. We only need one.
And we
Yeah.
have that.
And we have
it.
that.
Great. Let's see it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And you got some pictures that maybe you could talk about at the same time. Maybe you could show them.
Yeah. Well, let's see if we can get everything to work here. Open up PowerPoint. Okay. So now I think I need to have permission to share my screen, right?
I think you can just share.
Okay,
You may-
share screen. I'll go
Oh,
here.
yeah, the green
and
one down at the bottom.
share. Okay, do you see that?
Yes,
You got
we
that?
got it. Wonderful.
All right.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop down to where we left off the last time. So that puts us at 1962. I know exactly where we left off the last time. So I'm going to start us over there. Yep. I'm gonna go a
Man,
little
there's
bit-
some
little
interesting
bit
pictures
further
already.
here. Okay, I'm going to start here. We actually left off here, but I've got a new update here. Now, all of these are referenced. All of these have paperwork and documentation to back them up. I'm not making anything up. All this information comes from Leonard Stringfield's book, UFO Crash Retrieval. So what he did over a 35-year period is he identified, tracked down, verified, and vetted firsthand military witnesses that absolutely dealt with the bodies, dealt with the craft, dealt with the crash retrievals, people who were on autopsies, people who had firsthand knowledge of the pathologist reports. That's the caliber of witnesses that Leonard had compiled. So to get back to this case, and this is where we left off last time. This is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, 1962. This is a 15-foot diameter dish-shaped craft that was seen by 5 members of the 354th Tactical Air Command Fighter Wing. This is at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And what they were doing is they were running down the row of hangars. They were looking for a wall to complete their 4-wall handball court. And so they're running down this hangar row, and this one hangar was open up. They accidentally ran in and they saw this 15-foot diameter dish-shaped craft propped up onto engine test stands. There were 7 MPs with rifles basically guarding this. And these guys ran in here. They were shocked, completely shocked at what they were seeing. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. They were challenged by one of the guards. So we're going to take Rudy's drawing use it as a guide, and I'm going to take you to the full color illustration. And now you can see what this would have looked like if we were there back in 1962. And I would say in the mid 1940s, all the way up till the, I would say early 1970s, all roads led to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. However, since then, the United States military industrial complex has diversified their portfolio. They have repositories all around the country. So you've got Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, you've got MacDill Air Force Base, you've got Homestead Air Force Base, you've got Eglin Air Force Base. We have a firsthand witness to the bodies.
Wow.
Basically, quote unquote, everyone thinks they're at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They are not. They are in cold storage vaults at Eglin Air Force Base. So that's another resource. So what they've done is they spread out these assets so they don't have a single point failure. So getting back to this case, you can see the guards are guarding this craft. You've got the engine test stands. We've got the joggers in the background just entering the hangar here. And I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this is the interaction that the leader of the 354th Tactical Air Command Fighter Wing had with this military police here. It says, "The guard challenged by saying, 'I don't think you're supposed to be here, sir.' I replied to the affirmative, and we turned about face and departed mumbling to ourselves that the good old US had developed or had all along flying saucers in service." So this is one of these cases where we have first-hand military source fighter pilot telling us that they've seen these dish-shaped craft within the hangars of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Amazing.
All right, let's continue on here. This is reference number 53, date 1963. Source was PJ, captain in the Navy and a pilot for Braniff Airlines. Now I've got his name, and he saw a 30-foot diameter dish-shaped craft inside a hangar at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It may have been in the same vicinity as where these other pilots saw this. And when he came back, he was questioned about this. And the general asked him, "What did you see?" And the guy said, "I didn't see anything." And he said, "That's a good answer." And that's the end of that case. So you can see how they've kept this under wraps. Now, this next case is very interesting because I put a lot of research into this one. I tracked down the gentleman who interviewed the Marine. So this is Cherry Point, North Carolina, December 1963. This is page 152 in the book, a U.S. Marine. He boards a plane with blacked out windows, and he's flown 3 hours from Cherry Point, North Carolina to an undisclosed location. I'm going to go to the next slide. This gives you an idea of where Cherry Point is, a little bit north of Havelock. This is in Cherry Point, North Carolina. He boards this plane. They fly 3 hours. They land. They get out of the plane. They go inside this hangar. Hangar doors open. He looks inside and he sees a 40-foot diameter dish-shaped craft, 15 feet tall, kind of a fat hamburger configuration. There were 9 elliptically shaped opaque windows wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. The whole thing was propped up on scaffolding about 5 feet. You could walk under this thing. Highly polished chrome mirror aluminum reflective exterior. No seams, no visible means of propulsion, no socket head cap screws, no hex head cap screws. Now they had multiple teams of white lab coat technicians that were desperately trying to breach the hull of this craft. They were using diamond tip drill bits, they were using acetylene torches, and they were using lasers, and they still couldn't get in after all that. This is back in 1963. And if you look at these red dots on the bottom view, those are the attempted points of entry with a diamond tip drill bit. Let's move on here. So this is Joseph Race full color rendering, gives you an idea of what this thing looked like. Now I will mention that this Marine, who we have his name, he said that the hatchway seams on the bottom of this craft were so fully integrated into the skin of the craft, you could not put a razor blade in there, like it was liquid metal. That's what we're talking about here. We'll move on. These are the 3 attempts that they tried to get into this thing. So when they tried diamond tip drill bits, that failed. Then they brought in acetylene cutting torches, and that failed. And then they brought in a laser. They did have lasers in 1963. They weren't the most powerful things in the world, but they did have lasers, and that failed as well. So that's the bottom line on the 3 attempts that they used. We'll move on here. This is an original sketch from the Marine. His name is Roy Baker, U.S. Marine, 1963. This is literally a couple of weeks after Kennedy was assassinated at Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963. If you look on the upper left and right, you can see these lights shining down. So the whole place was excruciatingly well lit. If you look at the left of center window, you can see a little bit of a dot there. That's the attempted point of entry with the diamond tip drill bit. You can see the whole thing is propped up on scaffolding. And then below the craft, there are these pads, and that's what supported the craft on the scaffolding. Let's go to a little bit more of a refined drawing here. This is from Michael Johnstone, who interviewed Roy Baker back in 1986. So this is a little bit more of a refined drawing. The primary eyewitness also said that there was a 1-inch lip between the outer skin of the craft itself and the outer portion of these elliptically shaped opaque windows, something you could feel with your thumb. So that was something I thought was interesting. Let's move on here. This is my cleaned up AutoCAD drawing. Gives you an idea of what this thing actually looked like. Now, directly below this craft, painted on the floor, was a white circle. And his job was to guard this craft for 2 weeks and shoot to kill anyone who attempted to get into that white circle. That was his mandate. That was his job. Let's move on here. This gives you a little bit better idea of what this catwalk looked like. And you can kind of see this 1-inch lip on the side of the craft where the windows are. That's something that this Marine mentioned multiple times in the report. So this was our very first pass illustration by John McNeil, trying to get this whole thing illustrated. So we've incorporated all of the elements. We've got the lab coat technicians. We've got the craft propped up on the scaffolding. They had a catwalk where you could walk across this craft. If you look closely, you can see that white circle painted on the floor, and then you can see the lab coat technician with the laser. So we've got basically all the primary components encapsulated with this illustration. So what I want to do now is I want to pretend that we are breaching top secret here, and we're going to sneak inside the chain link fence. I'm going to take you through the chain link fence, and we're going to penetrate this hangar to get a real good look at what this thing looks like. So this is what it would have looked like on the outside. And let's get through the chain link fence, and we'll zoom in a little bit closer here. This is all coming into view now. And this is all back in December 1963. I've got about 5 pages of original handwritten notes from Michael Johnstone, who interviewed Roy Baker back in 1986. So this is well documented. It's mentioned by Leonard Stringfield. So we're a little bit closer now. You can see the lights coming down. You've got the overhead lights. You can see the white circle on the floor that wraps around the outer circumference of the craft itself. Let's move on. Getting a little bit closer now, there were also what looked like CAA types that showed up at this scene as well. Let's go a little bit closer. This is now getting into the bottom of the craft. We've got the scaffolding, we've got the lab coat technician, so that's all coming into view. If you look closely, you can see that 1-inch lip where the skin meets the windows. That's apparent in this illustration here. This is about a 45-degree look down angle. This gives you a very good idea of the catwalk and scaffolding. I've got 3 other separate cases where these different UFO craft that were retrieved and recovered are being propped up by scaffolding. This appears to be something that's consistent running through multiple cases. For some reason, they like to prop these things up. They like to walk under them. I guess they just want to get a good bird's eye view and access to both the bottom, sides, and top, making this catwalk here. Let's move on. So the last day he was there, he guarded this craft for 2 weeks. The last day he was there, he saw them moving this craft off the scaffolding. It was being loaded onto a cradle connected to a trailer from a tractor, and they were moving it to the next location, and they were putting tarps on the top of it. So here you can see they built this cradle device. And then now they're going to start draping over these tarps, which you can see here. So this is about 50% tarped at this time.
Wow.
And then if we go to the next slide, you can kind of see here now we're fully tarped and we're getting ready to move to the next location. I'm going to move on to the next slide. And now we're fully out of this facility. So bottom line is, one way they've been able to keep all this under wraps for all these decades is, number one, they compartmentalize the information. Very few people at the top know the whole story. Number two is they move these assets from one location to the other so that no group of people have a heads up on what's going on. That's how they're able to keep this under wraps for all these years. Let's move on here. This
I got a
is
question
really
now.
strong. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Was there any talk at all about them ever getting into this thing?
Not that I know of. Nope. All three attempts failed. And I've got 3 other cases where they also use diamond tip drill bits to get into. And you can see that the military industrial complex, they are desperate to get into these craft. Number one, to reverse engineer the propulsion system. And number two, to take advantage and exploit the weapons advancement technology that they can gain from these craft. And so that's why it's so desperate. Now, the only thing I believe I have heard regarding how they got into these craft is that the only way that you can get into these things is if you take the entire craft and dip it into a vat of liquid nitrogen and you cold shock it, and then you can get inside.
Wow.
That appears to be one of the only ways that you can get into these things.
Michael, what was the difference in the materials between the first one and the other ones? Because that one kind of looked, I don't know, almost like plasma, if you will, the
Sure.
first one.
Yeah, the 1962 case in comparison to the 1963 case. Well, technically it'd be hard to determine that, because I can't say that I would be an expert on the tensile strength of what they found out if it was moved to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So I guess I couldn't comment on that, but you can clearly see that the intelligence community, the defense contractors, they're desperately trying to reverse engineer the metallurgical technology associated with these vehicles so they can implement the technology into our 5th and 6th generation stealth fighter aircraft. That's been the mandate. That has been priority 1 for this. Absolutely.
Wow. Okay.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, here is this incident with the laser. According to Roy Baker, when they turned the laser on, it bounced off and reflected from the skin of the craft and damaged a ceiling tile above the craft itself. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
We'll move on to the next slide. This gives you an idea here of how it damaged the ceiling tile. So when they moved this laser away, they touched the craft. Other than it being warm to the touch, it had no effect whatsoever. So if we could figure out a way to incorporate this technology into our F-22, F-35, or something beyond those, we would be ruling the skies. We already are ruling the skies, but now we would really be out in front. And so that's why a toilet seat cover costs $400. That's why a screwdriver costs $300. It's because of these black programs that have run rogue. There's no congressional oversight. There's no public scrutiny. And so that's what we're up against here as citizens of this republic.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yep. Let's continue on. Now here's a drawing. This is from Roy Baker. This shows you the incident with the laser. These are his original sketches. And I'll move on to the next slide here. Now, he also mentioned that there were multiple teams of white lab coat technicians. They had color-coded badges. Now, each one of these personnel had a different colored badge. So if you had a green badge, you could go here in the facility. If you had a yellow badge, you could go here in the facility. If you had a red badge, you had access to the entire facility. So this is something that we've heard multiple times before, this so-called color-coded badging process that they go through. Now, when Roy Baker was in this hangar with this craft, one day he was left alone there. He had a small Minox camera. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. And he took a photograph of this thing when no one was looking. And here he says, someday I will tell this story, and by God, people are going to believe me. However, that photograph was lost in a flood back in 1983. So we were this close of getting an actual photograph of this craft, but it was lost in 83. So you can see how the physical evidence is always 2 steps ahead of us. And we're always
Oh,
trying to
man.
catch up to this physical evidence here. So I thought, okay, let's take a period correct Minox camera and let's investigate what an actual photograph taken from this camera would look like if we were there today and we could snap a photo of this thing. And we made a replica of what it may look like. And this is what we came up. Something like this was taken by this Marine back in 1963. And it's just a shame that we don't have it today. We were so close of getting this here.
Oh, man.
Yep, we were so close. He also said that there was a United States Secretary of the Navy that tried to breach that white circle below the craft painted on the floor. He almost got shot. So it would have
Wow.
been this gentleman right here. Paul Nitz was Secretary of the Navy between 1963 and 1967. That checks out with the dates that Roy Baker had talked about. So it would have been this gentleman right here that nearly got shot for walking over that white line. Let's continue. Now, this is an interesting part of the story. 4-star Major General Melvin F. Nickel, Base Commander, Tinker Air Force Base, Oklahoma. Why do I bring him up? Let's go to the next slide. Here is his obituary. Ex-Tinker Commander Melvin McNichol dies. Daily Oklahoman, July 11th, 1986. So he is who he said he is. There really is a base commander, Tinker Air Force Base. His name was Melvin McNichol. He's gone now. The point I'm making here is that Melvin McNichol was friends with Charlotte Mann. She was involved in the Cape Girardeau retrieval operation in 1941. She actually held the photograph of the beings. Okay, so these two were friends. And over the years, they developed this mutual interest in UFOs. And so she kind of talked to Melvin McNichol and said, General, we've been friends for years now. We have a mutual interest in UFOs, and you've really never told me anything. Are you still my friend? And so this general, he kind of turns to Charlotte Mann and says, Charlotte, if you ever repeat what I'm about to tell you, not only will I deny it, but it could ruin my career. And he proceeded to tell her 3 things. Number 1, he saw a UFO, which was located in the West. That checks out with the Marine, because he flew by plane from Cherry Point, North Carolina to an undisclosed location that puts it in the range of the West. So that's first thing. Next thing is that Melvin McNichol said that he walked around a UFO on a catwalk, which was propped up by scaffolding.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what this Marine had talked about. So that checked out. That's something that checked out. And then
Oh, boy, we lost your sound.
We lost your mic,
lost my
Michael.
mic. Okay.
Oh, you're
That's
back. You're back. Yep.
You got it?
Nope, it's coming
no.
again.
Okay. I'm gonna
Yes.
unplug.
Thank
There you are.
Oh, no, we can't hear you. So sorry. Yeah, we lost your mic again. Hang with us, guys. This is so interesting, isn't it? Linda, I saw your question. You said, is it sentient? That first one did look right like it was plasma-ish. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
With you on that. We're waiting for Michael to restore his mic. You're muted right now. You would need to unmute, Michael. Just bear with us, guys. We're not going to stop. No, not yet, Michael. You're still muted, by the way. Okay.
No, you're still muted.
Yeah, he's working on it.
Yeah. 'Cause Boy, folks, these are the kinds of stories and pictures that everybody needs to see.
Absolutely. No, not
My-
yet, Michael. Oh, almost. Heard you for a second.
How about now?
Yes.
Yes,
No? Yes?
Yes.
That works? Okay. Good. Okay, so I'm trying to use this one. It should be clearer now.
We're good.
Does that sound better?
Sounds great.
Good.
sounds
Okay.
okay.
Okay, so the point I was making here on this case is when I heard these statements from Charlotte Mann back at IUFOC, this was about 5 years ago, I knew I had a real case because the Marine from Cherry Point, North Carolina, described the exact same points here that Charlotte Mann was talking about. When I heard this
Yeah.
from Charlotte Mann, I said, yep, I got it now, because I know these witnesses did not know each other at all. So it was independent confirmation from a secondary source that talked about something in the west that was seen, walked around a catwalk propped up by scaffolding, and then bodies were recovered. One was still alive. The Marine overheard these lab coat technicians when they were at these water coolers. They overheard this water cooler talk that mentioned bodies being recovered and one was still alive. So there was a definite independent confirmation here. So let's move on to the next case here. And
Yes.
this is, let's go here. Okay. Fort Riley, Kansas, December 10th, 1964. Aaron, Quebec, primary.
Hey, wait, just a second for a short comment for the people that joined us late.
Okay. Okay.
We are having a great time here because we are looking at actual stories and pictures
Yes.
of UFOs. So we're talking with Michael Schratt, and he is showing us what we have been waiting for a long time. Thank you, Michael, and go ahead and continue.
Sure. So Fort Riley, Kansas, December 10th, 1964. Primary eyewitness served in the infantry 1st Division. This is page 24 in Leonard's book. And I'm going to move to the next slide here. This is a map of Camp Forsyth where all this went down here. This was at night. He and 2 other military personnel were loaded into a 6x6 troop transport. They went about a half mile down the road. They got off, they walked into a large open field, and they ended up seeing this craft in the field, tipped up at an angle, 48 feet in diameter, 18 feet tall. This is all referenced in Leonard's book. I've got the original sketch from the primary eyewitness. There
Wow.
were these, call them 20-inch by 20-inch square box-like protrusions that wrapped around the outer circumference of the craft itself. There was a fin, and at the back bottom portion of the fin, there was what looked like an exhaust port. So in a nutshell, that's what this craft looked like. This was my first pass color illustration to give you an idea of what this may have looked like if we were there back in 1964. Here's Rudy's drawing that
Wow.
gives you an idea of what this thing actually looks like. There was a Huey helicopter hovering over the scene with a spotlight shining down. They had people with Geiger counters walking around this thing, checking for radiation. They had other people taking motion picture and still camera photographs of this craft itself. I'm going to move on to the next slide. This is by Joseph Wraith, giving an idea of what this thing actually looks like. So, you know, we're already 4 and 5 in now, and that doesn't even consider the ones we did on the last interview. So when you take it, this body of evidence as a united coalition, you can see that the craft count keeps going up, the body count keeps going up. And again, could some of these be hoaxes? Absolutely. We have to consider that possibility. But when you have 119 cases from firsthand military sources that have no reason to lie, we owe it to these people to look into their testimony, verify the information, vet the witnesses, track down their bosses, and then have congressional hearings and bring these craft out. That's what we're shooting for. Anything less than that, we're all going to be here another 80 years spinning our wheels, and we still won't know what's going on. So it's incumbent upon us to track down these witnesses. Okay, here's a little bit of a blow-up view. You can kind of see this fin in the back and then this exhaust port looking device at the back or aft end of the craft itself. Let's move on. Now, there was a second witness that saw the same craft but it was propped up on this M123 tractor trailer during the movement out of the field. So we had secondary independent confirmation that this thing was moved out. He also talked about military personnel that were retrieved within this pipe retrieval operation. They were all wearing these biohazard suits. They had smocks on, they had gloves on, they had masks on. So this was a secondary source to confirm it from the primary source. All right, now next one. Air Force Museum, Dayton, Ohio, 1965, page 93, case 11 in the book. So if anyone wants to follow along, you can track down this page in Leonard's book and you can kind of follow along here. Now, I've debated whether I should include this particular case in this presentation because it's a little bit weird. It's a little bit strange and bizarre, but it is a part of the Stringfield narrative. So I'm going to include it anyways, regardless of the results. Okay, so I'm going to set this up. So this is Air Force Museum, 1965. A couple goes to visit the Air Force Museum. And they go over to the German V2 rocket display, which is still there today. You can walk right up to this thing. I took this photograph. You can walk right up to this thing and you can stand probably 5 feet from where this couple was standing back in 1965 and see the exact same rocket they were looking at. And the husband leaves his wife stranded with the V2 rocket. He just wanders away and leaves her stranded. She's all alone. He starts walking down the back corridors of the Air Force Museum. He goes through a double door. And when he bursts through this door, he's met with this 3.5, 4 feet tall ET being, oversized head, oversized eyes, slit for a mouth, minute nose, wearing a one-piece loose, not tight, loose fitting flight suit that looked like it came from the Mercury space era, somewhere around 1957 timeframe, like something that looked like that. He had an index finger pointed out, and this guy was shocked. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Now, within 5 seconds of the primary eyewitness coming into contact with this being, and you can see the wife is on the upper left-hand corner in the blow-up, that he left her completely stranded. The bottom right is the detail in large view that shows you the buzzers and the alarm systems that went off in the Air Force Museum, and all these military personnel were ushering the public out of the Air Force Museum. And this guy's just can't believe what he saw. So what we believe happened is somehow this ET being escaped from its underground containment vault and was wandering, believe it or not, the back corridors of the Air Force Museum. I know it's crazy, but it's part of Springfield cases, you know, so we can only present what we're given here. All right, next one. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, 1966. This was a civil service electrician, page 17 in the book, abstract 13. Now, this gentleman worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and he came home at night, and he was wearing a large trench coat, and he came up to his son, and he said, "Son, there's something I want to show you." So he opened up his breast pocket here in his trench coat, pulled out an 8x10 glossy black and white photograph of an ET being held up by its hands in kind of a Southwest environment. Could have been New Mexico, could have been Arizona. We're not sure, but it was definitely in the Southwest. One guy had kind of a medical uniform on. The other was wearing khakis and boots. He was more of a military personnel. And they're just holding up this ET body that was wearing a one-piece tight-fitting flight suit. He was about 4 feet tall with an oversized head, and his son is absolutely shocked. And he told his son, I can't keep this. The next day, he brought it back at the base, but they already discovered that he stole it that night and he was fired on the spot. So he came home that day, told his son that I just got fired. So, you know, you're going to pay a serious price for smuggling this kind of physical evidence out of these military type vaults. I mean, this is not something you want to play around with. These are the crown jewels. These are the silver bullets. These are the trump card technologies that we've all dreamed of. Some people have actually had firsthand interactions with these things. Okay, next one. This is July 3rd, 1967. He was a Marine, private first class. page 86 in the book, case A5. Now, they had landed in the Southwest, probably Arizona. We don't know for sure. It didn't say in the book, but they landed on an unimproved runway. There was a Quonset style hangar. There was a prefabricated building, and there was a couple other tents off to the side. Now, his job was to guard this Quonset style hangar facility. By day 3, this guy was bouncing off the walls. He was so curious about what could be in this hangar that he decided to walk over, and you can see him in the back of this drawing by Rudy. He kind of pulled up on the flap and looked inside, and he saw a 30-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. That's the first thing. The second thing he saw were white lab coat technicians, just like the one from 1963 from Roy Baker, who was the Marine. So that's the second thing he saw. Then he saw, you could call them inspection tables near the craft that had calipers, micrometers, they had tensile strength utilities, they had different mechanical testing devices there. And then off to the side, which you can see on the right of this illustration, there was a walk-in freezer and there were body bags. He didn't see any ET bodies, but he definitely said that there were body bags very close to the walk-in freezer. He was reprimanded about this and then sent back. So again, this did not work out well for him, but he did see this there. So we took all the information from the primary eyewitness and we used Rudy's drawing as a guide, and we came up with this full color rendering if we
Wow.
could be there back in 1967 and actually see this thing. And you know,
Wow.
they were definitely testing the metal of this craft. That's very clear from what the witness said. And so all this time has passed now. If we go back to 41, we fast forward in time to 2024, we've had decades to reverse engineer the technology using black budget funding as much as $100 million per day during the Clinton administration. So we would hope, we would think that after all this time, the military industrial complex actually made some progress and we got something for our money. Now, the question is, are we ever going to see this technology? It's debatable, but bottom line is they've definitely spent the money on it. They've got the expertise. We can only hope they actually made some breakthroughs here. And the evidence indicates that they absolutely have. All right, this one is very important. Fort Hood, Texas, late 1960s. This is a private pilot. He's the primary source of this case. This is page 91 in Leonard's book. Talks about something called Robert Gray Army Airfield, which is something very interesting because if I go back one here, it's part of Fort Hood. So within Fort Hood, you have Robert Gray Army Airfield. And this private pilot, this is late 1960s, probably 68 timeframe. He had to make an emergency landing at Robert Gray Army Airfield. This is off limits. This is restricted area. You just can't land here, but he had an emergency, so he came in for a landing. Now, when he landed, if you look on the upper left-hand part of this drawing, you can see that Cessna 172 landed on this remote dirt strip. Within 15 seconds, and you can see him, he's got his hands up by the Cessna 172. There was a Jeep with 2 MPs with pistols aimed at this guy, telling him to don't move, don't say one word. They had him at gunpoint. While all this is going on, this absolute huge 400-foot long by 400-foot wide bypass door opens up right in the middle of the desert, right in the middle of the ground. You would never even know that there's an underground facility here because the top of these doors were camouflaged with rocks and shrubbery and low tree. You would never know it's there. I mean, it's completely, this thing opened up like a zipper, showing you this interior facility. So they absolutely have an underground facility at Gray Army Airfield in Texas, which is part of Fort Hood. Now, what's inside? He said that there were like Cray computers, vintage computers in there. If we extrapolate the data, there are multiple sources indicating that eyewitnesses have seen military helicopters escorting UFOs when they're coming out of this facility. So this appears to be the staging area for man-made reverse engineered flying saucer craft. And then they use these Chinook CH-47s as chase that fly and usher these craft during these test flights because they're always seen in conjunction with military helicopters. That clinches it right there. I mean, there are multiple witnesses that have seen flying saucers come out of these things escorted by Huey UH-1 helicopters, CH-47 Chinooks, something going on. Now, he also mentioned that this was an underground runway large enough to accommodate 4-engine C-130 transport aircraft. We're talking about a massive facility here that you could land airplanes in. So let's go to the next slide. Is there a top secret underground facility located at Graham Army Airfield? The witnesses are telling us yes. Okay, a couple of quick notations here. This is page 100 in the book. This is from researcher Tommy Blond, who interviewed Colonel X. It's all.
Oh boy. Sounds like you froze, Michael. Yeah.
UFO activity to monitor these craft or airlift them out of the area if one has malfunctioned. So that's interesting. Then he says, the technology that is being applied in this underground complex would remind someone of a science fiction thriller. It is unbelievable what they know and can do from this area. Taking as a whole, these two statements are huge. They're absolutely huge. This is the type of helicopters that are used in these test flights where they fly chase. Now, I have a question. When we talk about aircraft or UFOs being tested, what comes to mind when we have a test flight of it? Does anything come to mind in Texas?
Well, yeah. How about the cache incident?
Well done. Well done. Well done. Yes, absolutely.
Because
Well
I
done.
saw in one of the drawings, I saw a craft looking exactly like what Mrs. Cash saw and what burned her with radiation.
Well done. I'm very proud of you. You did a good job. Okay, so yes, absolutely. It's the Cash Landrum incident,
There you
December
go.
29th, 1980, Huffman, Texas. So we'll just rip through this in the remaining minutes we have here. So we've got Betty Cash, we've got Vicki Landrum, we've got Colby Landrum, approximately 9:20 at night driving home. Colby Landrum was in the back seat. He's the one who first noticed this light. The light kept getting closer and closer and closer until it essentially lit up the entire area. Now, Betty Cash thought that it was literally in conjunction with Vicki Landrum. They thought it was the second coming of Christ. They had no idea that what they were looking at. This was shocking. This is horrifying. It basically turned night into day. This craft parked itself 150 feet in front of Betty's car. She slammed on the brakes. Vicki Landrum went forward, put her hands on the dashboard. Her fingers melted into the dashboard. So we've got CE2 effects right off the bat. Now, this thing was a double ice cream cone with the wide ends connected together. There was a series of holes wrapped around the outer circumference of the seam at the midpoint of the craft itself, 90 feet tall. It was making loud roaring noise. There was a blue colored flame coming out of the bottom of this thing. So every time this thing bobbed down, this flame would go on and then this thing would bob up again. This whole process was repeated multiple times. Betty Cash gets out of the car. I'm going to move on to the next slide here. Betty Cash gets out of the car. She walks toward the hood and is looking at all of this. She took the brunt of the radiation poisoning because she was outside of the vehicle. After about a couple of minutes, she was walking back toward the driver's side door. She reached down to the handle and burned her hand. This is all in December, so it was cold out. She burned her hand.
Yeah.
She had to use the leather flap of her jacket to open up the car door. When she got inside, it was boiling hot inside. They had to turn the air conditioner on, so that's interesting. Now, a couple minutes later, Vicki Landrum and Colby Landrum counted no less than 23 double rotor Chinook helicopters chasing after this craft. Within minutes, Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, Colby Landrum suffered from the severe effects of radiation poisoning. They had a headache, they were throwing up, they were vomiting, they had skin problems. Betty lost all of her hair, their nails had ridges in them. It was terrible. It was terrible. Now, Want to move on to the next slide here. This is the map that I drew based on John Schuessler's kind of rough map, but you can kind of see here, X marks the spot. Betty's car is at the top of this map. That's where she slammed on the brakes. So you can see just how close she was. And then the flight path is from the northeast to the southwest. And that's where this thing kind of floated over here. Now we have also have independent witnesses that also saw the helicopter and the craft as well. Now they weren't anywhere near it, so they didn't have any effects of radiation, but we have independent confirmation from at least 4 other witnesses that saw this. Now, why is any of this important? Because if we move on to the next slide here, what did 3 Texans encounter? Sighting of UFO brought illness, but few answers. This is Clarion Ledger, December 25th, 1983. Florida Today, December 4th, 1983, trace effects. So according to John Schuessler, which I think is a very interesting part of the story, John Schuessler interviewed all 3 eyewitnesses. He was the first investigator on the scene. He was the principal investigator. He said that about 4 days after this event, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers came in, they dug up the ground and the pavement where this thing came down, and it left a big black mark on the pavement. They came over, they ground it up, they dug up the road and repaved it. And then 2 weeks later, they came back, dug it up again, and repaved it a second time. So we know for a fact something's going on here. I'm going to move on to this one. This shows you the underground runway where the C-130s can come in here and they can, that's how big this facility, can you imagine how large this whole facility is here? It's a massive, absolutely massive facility. I think we got time for one more here. California City.
Quick question first.
Yeah.
This thing with cash,
Yes.
what do you think? Was it ours or theirs?
I've heard both sides. There are some who said it was an ET craft that was incorporated a hybrid propulsion system, something like an atomic propulsion system, an atomic rocket. That could be the case. It's possible. I'm leaning more toward man-made all the way around. Because there's some evidence that there were pilots, three crew members in this. So I kind of lean more of the terrestrial end of it. But the bottom line is, whatever this thing was, it had a hull breach in the reactor and it started spewing out all of this radioactivity material, which caused the sickness of the 3 eyewitnesses.
Yeah.
California City, summer 1971. Debbie Clayton is the primary eyewitness. This is page 233 in the book. And what she saw was a large acorn-shaped craft with a mushroom on top. It kind of had this rolled edge look to it, 5 feet high, 10 feet in diameter, came down about 1/8 of a mile from where they were. This is all near Edwards Air Force Base. Within minutes, the military got on scene. You can see on Rudy's drawing, the lower right, with this general. He threw down the primary eyewitness camera, told them to vacate the area immediately, but they did get to see the retrieval operation. They brought this craft onto the trailer and then we believe shipped it to Edwards North Base Complex. So this is another one of these cases where Edwards North Base Complex kind of plays a role here. Now, while we're at this, we should continue on here with Homestead Air Force Base. This is a legendary case. It has never been proven 100% conclusive, so it could be just legendary, but it's something that has grown to this incredible status within this field. This is the alleged interaction that Richard Nixon had with Jackie Gleason, Homestead Air Force Base, February 19th, 1973. Now, the beginning part of this story is absolutely 100% correct. This did happen. They were at a charity golf outing in Florida. This absolutely did happen. Paul Blake Smith wrote a whole book about this. He did a very good job. I want to give him credit for his research. So here you see Jackie Gleason with the ever-present carnation. Okay, he was always having a carnation. Jackie Gleason here, this is February 19th, 1973. So this absolutely did happen. Somewhere around the 9th hole, the subject of UFOs came up. Now, Jackie Gleason was a huge UFO fan. He had a house that was built in the shape of a mothership. That's what they called it. So he had a huge interest in UFOs. And so he turned to the president, says, Mr. President, you know, I've got this tremendous interest in UFOs. Is there something you can tell me? You're the president, right? You should know, right? So President Nixon turns to Jackie and said, Jackie, if you'll be available later this evening, I might be able to help you with this. Let's move on here. So unannounced, as the story goes, Richard Nixon pulls up to Jackie Gleason's home and says, Jackie, you remember what we were talking about at the 9th hole? Yes, Mr. President. Well, why don't you come follow me? So President Nixon lets Jackie Gleason into his car. Richard Nixon drives him to Homestead Air Force Base. They go past the security guard who's shocked to see the president. He waves him through. They walk into a facility where they saw at least 6 vintage Coke freezers. Each Coke freezer had the mangled remains of childlike bodies. They were dismembered. They were burnt. Jackie Gleason is looking at this thing. He's shocked. He can't believe what he's seeing. In the background, there were blue-colored bins with what looked like debris in the background. I'm going to go on to the next slide. This is what these Coke freezers look like. Almost identical to what you're seeing here. Jackie Gleason saw 6 of these. Here he is looking inside this craft and to show you what the bodies look like here. We'll move on. Fort Lauderdale News, February 1st, 1973. Florida's most star-studded sport event, Super Golf with Superstars. Jackie Gleason, Inverary National Airlines Classic. So this did happen. The beginning part of this story absolutely did happen. Jackie Gleason, here's the blow up of the promotional newspaper clipping. Here's Jackie Gleason driving President Nixon in his golf cart. This is February 20th, 1973. President visits the golf outing. So we've established this beyond a shadow of a doubt. The question is, could the president have snuck away, got with Jackie Gleason, drove to Homestead Air Force Base, and could they have made it back to Miami in under 90 minutes? Well, you can see this map here, and this would have been 1973. It took 38 minutes to get from Miami to Homestead. Since this was 12 midnight, there would have been nobody on the road. 1973, let's drop that down to 30 minutes. So it would have taken them 30 minutes to get there. Let's say they spent 15 minutes in the hangar, 30 minutes back. They could have done the whole thing in under an hour and a half. So technically, it could have been possible. It's a stretch, but it could have been possible. Dayton Daily News, May 14th, 1993. Jackie Gleason claimed that Richard Nixon took him to Homestead Air Force Base and he viewed alien bodies. That's written about in a book here, and it isn't just Jackie Gleason. So that's the first thing. Next thing, the Times Tribune, July 5th, 1987, in her unpublished biography of the funny man entitled The Great One, Beverly Gleason's second spouse described a bizarre trip Jackie took with then president in 1973 to Homestead Air Force Base in Florida to see what she says were the bodies of 4 dead space aliens recovered by the Air Force. So again, this has never been conclusively proven, but according to Beverly McKittrick, when Jackie got home that night, he plopped himself down on the couch and he was a changed man. He was never the same man again after what he allegedly saw. So essentially, that's the story. What I wanted to do in this presentation is just go over some more of these mission critical crash retrieval cases, make these cases come alive, and preserve an important part of our national history.
Oh,
Did a great job. Really great.
Man.
Mhm.
Now, boy, I hate to quit right now, but we're out of time. And I'm thinking, though, you have enough pictures and stories left to do another show on this, don't you?
Well, you know, there's always enough information to make it to the next ice age. So there's no shortage of material. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, gosh, I thank you so much for being with us.
No problem. No
Michael.
problem. No problem.
Ah,
Great to be with you.
yeah, that was great. And
We'll hope to speak to you again.
we're out of time. So for those of you that watched this to the end, I sure thank you for being with us. And until next time, be good to each other.
See ya.
Good night,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.